that we actually need to start in Photoshop. So I made this really simple drawing in Photoshop here with a circle and a square and this kind of freehand blobby shape that I've named William. If you'd like to follow along with me in this lab, you can always design your own simple drawing like this. Alright, so the important thing here is that each layer has its own name, and anything that I'm thinking I want to animate separately, which is everything, I've put on its own layer. Okay? So in order to get our artwork from Photoshop into After Effects, what we need to do is import it into our After Effects project. And by the way, I'm just using Photoshop for this because that's what Sarah Beth uses. The same exact thing would work in the same way with Illustrator art as well. So when you first launch After Effects, you're going to see this home window right here. So go ahead and just press this new project button. Okay, so now here's the After Effects interface. And yours might look a little bit different from mine because it's kind of customizable, but don't sweat that. What we want to do now is import our layered artwork. So I'm going to press Command-I, or you could go to File, Import, File. Command-I. I'm on a Mac. Right? So when we do that, we can navigate to where we have our artwork, which is right here, okay? And now this is actually really important. If you don't see these options here, you need to press this button down here, which is a little bit hidden, this options button. So if yours looks kind of blank like this, press that, and now you can see the import options. And those options are basically twofold. One is you can import as footage, which means that it's basically one layer, like a piece of video or a photo or one layer from a Photoshop document, right? Or you can import as a composition, okay? And that means, and that's actually what we want to do in this case, what that means is it imports layered artwork and preserves all the layers, okay? In this case, I'm going to choose retain layer sizes. Don't worry about that for now. Okay? So let me hit open, boop, and you'll see, oh yes, it's like, are you sure you want to do this? And I'm just going to hit OK, and I'm going to keep the layer styles editable. Great. So now up here in my project window, you can see that I've got a folder here now with the name of my Photoshop doc. And here are all the layers that I made in Photoshop, okay? My circle, my square, and William, right? Additionally, it has this composition icon here and this composition layer. And you're kind of wondering, what's a composition? Because that's not something that that's not a term you use in Photoshop or Illustrator as far as I know. A composition is where you do your work in After Effects. Let me double click this and I'll show you. If I double click this now, you can see that I've got my composition window up here with all these same objects that I had in Photoshop. And down here I have my timeline. And those two things make up my composition, okay? Between those two windows, the timeline and this canvas here, that's where I'm going to do all my work in After Effects, right? So that's what it's called. It's called a composition. Now the cool thing about this, as you can see, is that it's preserved all the layers in the order in which I made them in Photoshop, right? And even kept all of the same names for everyone. So that's really awesome, and I'm hoping that means that you see that this isn't too scary right away. And speaking of very scary, look who decided to join us today. My cat named Sebastian. Hi Sebastian, say hi to everybody. Oh. So now that we have the artwork imported, we're pretty much ready to move into the animation phase, except that I need to just explain a few things to you first. Let's dig into one of our layers here. So I'm going to turn off my square and William, bye William, and let's just focus on the circle. If I twirl this down here, you can see that there are these 5 basic properties of pretty much any layer in After Effects, okay? These are always the most basic ways that you can change this layer. Right? So position is like where it is on screen, scale is how big or small it is, rotation is how rotated it is, and then there's opacity, which is kind of the opposite of transparency. So if something's 100% opaque, then it's 0% transparent, kind of like a wall. But if something is 0% opaque, if it has 0 opacity, then it's fully transparent, like a window or something, okay, right? And something that's really important to note about all of these properties is that they have these values associated with them. So for example, position. These two numbers here are the X and Y coordinates for where the circle is on screen. If I move the circle, you can see that those values are changing. And if I move it over here, you can see that they're different from where it started, which was here, okay? So those are the values, and all properties of any layer have values, okay? For scale, the values are the scale of it. Right now it's 185, right? I hope that makes sense. Values. Now, the other thing is anchor point, which I didn't talk at all about. And anchor point's a little bit different from the other basic transforms, okay? But it's super important. In fact, in some way, it's sort of like the most important one because scale and rotation, and to some degree or other position, but we're not going to talk about that now, are dependent on anchor points. So let me get in a little closer here. So you can see that as I scale the circle up and down, it's scaling in and out of that anchor point. And similarly, when I rotate this, it's rotating around the anchor point, okay? This is like a really important thing to understand about After Effects. Anchor point is very, very important. And you kind of always want to think about the anchor point, really honestly, before you animate it. And speaking of animating, the way that we animate anything in After Effects, always, is by setting keyframes. Keyframes are actually really important, and if you've never used any time-based software, you might not understand them, so I need to explain this in a little bit more detail. All right, so this is a little bit abstract, but bear with me here for 1 second, all right? So to animate a property really means that you're changing those values over time, right? Without change, there's no animation. So for example, if I set a keyframe for scale at 100% and then I move in time and I set another keyframe for scale at 100%, there's no change. It's not really animated, okay? These keyframes basically mark points in time where you're specifying a specific value on a property, like position or scale, okay? So for example, in plain English, if it's position we're talking about here, you'd say like the circle layer at the start of the composition is right here, okay? And then to create a change in a property over time, you need at least 2 keyframes with different values. So first the circle's here, and then later in time, the circle's here. There's a change over time. Okay, so I know that didn't make total sense just yet, but I wanted to get that technical mumbo-jumbo out of the way first, all right? So let me explain it to you here in After Effects, and it'll make a lot more sense, right? So for my circle layer, for example, if I just want to animate position, right? The way that I make the first keyframe, and this goes for any property ever in After Effects, the way that you make the first keyframe for any property is you press this stopwatch button here. Boop, okay? And you'll see now that it has made a keyframe. And it has made a keyframe where my current time indicator is. That's this sort of bar here, okay? So right at the beginning of the composition, where I pressed this button here, it made a keyframe, and that's this diamond shape. Additionally, you can kind of see that it's like lit this stopwatch up in blue and put the little like time indicator in there. Okay, that means that like a keyframe has been made on this property, right? But that still doesn't mean that animation has been made, as I just went over, because we only have 1 keyframe at 1 point in time, right? So basically, if I grab my current time indicator and I move, just say to like 1 second here or something, now, if I change these values, I will have made an animation, okay? And I could do that in a couple different ways. I could change the values just by clicking and dragging this, okay? Or, what's even better, is I could just grab this here, okay? And you can see now that it's making this motion path. And what that means is that After Effects interpolates, which is just a fancy word for saying that it animates between the keyframe states for you, okay? This is how it works. You kind of define this state and then that state, and then After Effects moves, in this case, the object between those 2 states, right? So that's how keyframing works. Something else that's actually really important to know about keyframes is that they can very easily be edited down here in the timeline. For example, the easiest way to edit keyframes in a certain way is that you can push them in time. You can make these 2 keyframes closer together or farther apart. And when I make them closer together, the animation happens faster because the animation's happening over fewer frames. It's happening over a shorter period of time, right? Also, if I take the animation and I widen it out, it's now happening slower because I'm taking the same 2 keyframes and I'm just spacing them out in time differently, okay? That's another really important thing to remember about keyframes in After Effects. Finally, I also want to point out that you aren't limited to just 2 keyframes for any property or even just 1 animated property per layer, okay? You can animate everything about every layer at the same time if you want. Okay, you can make tons and tons of keyframes, and generally I do, right? So let's make a little animation here for this circle. I'm going to take the final keyframe for position, and I'm just going to move this to the end of the composition, right? Which means that it's just going to be moving the whole time that it's on screen, okay? And I'm going to go back to the beginning, and what I want to do is now add like an opacity animation onto this. So let me go ahead and actually, I want this to fade opacity-wise from 0 to 100%. So actually, I'm going to go to like, I don't know, somewhere over here, 14 frames or whatever. Now I'm going to make the opacity keyframe at 100%, okay? And then roll back to the beginning, and now I will change this to 0, okay? I can click in here and just type 0, for example, or I can click and roll that down. But now you can see that the circle has disappeared from the screen. And if I were to play this back, which I haven't explained yet, you would see that this is moving and fading on at the same time. Okay, so let me actually explain playback real quick, because it's a little bit different in After Effects than it would be in like in Premiere or in like an online music player or something like that. After Effects works by, it basically puts each frame into the RAM of your computer, and that's how it displays it. So what that means is, you can see right here that this sort of thin bar here, there's some green in there and some spaces where there's no green. Basically, where it's green, those frames have been added into the RAM already. So this is more technical mumbo jumbo, but basically when I go to play this, first it has to put all those frames into the RAM, and then it'll start playing it in real time in a loop. Okay? And by the way that you press play is by pressing the space bar, for example. So I'm going to do that now. It's going to kind of go a little slower, and now it's going to start playing in real time in a loop. And it's a little bit hard to see because it's the yellow on beige. I apologize for that. But you can see that it's just playing this loop of the circle fading in and moving, right? And another thing to remember is that animators in After Effects are always watching stuff in loops. We're just constantly watching loops. Okay, so let's now work the rest of these layers. I'm going to go ahead and scroll this down to collapse that, I guess, and turn on my square. Okay, so let's see. For my square, I'm going to, let's see, I'll scroll this open, and I did position and opacity, so let me work on scale, okay? So let me have this scale up to 100 and then scale down. So it's like starts at 0, goes up to 100, and then goes back down to 0 at the end of the column, right? So the way I would do that is press the stopwatch button, that's right, to make the first keyframe, always, and I'm going to set this to 0. Now scale, just by the way, is listed also with X and Y. You could unchain this, and so you could animate or adjust just the X of the scale or just the Y. In this case, I'm going to keep it chained, right? I'm going to kind of go to the middle of the composition, somewhere around 115, and now I'm going to set this to 100, right? And then I'm going to go to the end, and I'm going to take my 0% scale keyframe, I'm going to copy it and paste it. Okay, so now that's gone back into its own center. And if we preview that, it looks like this. Hey, it's amazing. Okay. And now, for the heck of it, what I want to do is add some rotation to this as well. Right? So I'm going to, that's right, press the stopwatch button to make my first rotation keyframe here at the beginning. And I'm going to go to the end. I just want this to be continuously rotating. All right. So now rotation is listed in a kind of funny way. Whole rotations, which is the X, and then degree rotations with the degree sign. Okay, so if you wanted something to rotate 3 whole times, you'd type 3 in there in the first one right here. If you just wanted to rotate 15 degrees, you'd do that in a degree point. Okay. In this case, I think I just wanted to rotate 1 whole degree, so I'm going to do that there. Or I could have typed 316 degrees, same exact thing, right? So let's preview this. Alright, so that's looking really good, and what I'm going to do is now just turn on William, and I think for William, I'm just going to animate the kitchen sink, alright? So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the composition, and let me twirl this down, and I'm basically going to make a keyframe now for position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Check this out. I can go and just kind of twirl down on all those, or press down on them all at once, right? Now I'm going to go to the end of the comp, and let me go ahead and I'll move him over a little bit, and I'll scale him down, and why don't I go ahead and rotate him a little bit, and fade him down to 0. Okay, let's check out all that. Wow, okay, so this is amazing, and I love it, and I can't wait to send it to my client, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna win some sort of reward for this animation. It's that good, okay? But right now it only exists in the RAM of After Effects. So how do I go ahead and take this and turn it into something tangible that I could send to my client or post on Instagram?
Render.
Well, the answer is rendering. Rendering is the final stage of the motion graphics workflow. Basically, when you're done with your work, like I just said, you want to turn it into something tangible, you need to render it. Okay, and there's basically two ways to do this. You can render through After Effects, which is kind of an old school way of doing it, or more recently, like in the last 10 years, Adobe has built a different piece of software called Adobe Media Encoder that you can use to render from After Effects, and it's really powerful, and it's definitely my preferred way to render, so I'd like to walk you through that now. So once your animation's finished, what you want to do is go up here to Composition and add to Adobe Media Encoder Q, or Option Command M on a Mac, okay? When you do this, what it's basically going to do is it's going to take a second and it's going to launch Media Encoder, and it's going to, After Effects is going to tell Media Encoder we want to work on this composition, okay, simple animation, here you go. So it's basically taken all the information from After Effects and now moved it into Adobe Media Encoder, right? Now, it will automatically drop on the sort of compression that you last put on there. For you, if you've never used it before, I'm not actually sure what it'll put on there, but what we want to do here, so no matter what it says, is drag down this, okay? In this case, we want to make an animated GIF, right? And that's what we're going to do with Sarah Beth's illustration as well, so let me just walk you through this. So pull this down to where it says animated GIF, okay? There's obviously quite a lot of other things in here that you can turn it into, but we're turning it into an animated GIF. And then this is kind of important, all right? So you want to press this button here, or this link here, and it's going to take a sec to do this, to open this dynamic link connection. I think it's now like really checking back and forth with After Effects to make sure, I'm not really sure when it's doing that, but whatever. Something technical. And then here, okay, so I designed the art, and I believe Sarah Beth designed her illustration the same way, bigger than necessary. It's just what you do, okay? So I made it 2000 by 2000, but if I want to make this in Instagram, for example, I want it to be 1080 by 1080 square. That's optimal for Instagram. So I would change this. I would uncheck this, okay? Leave this chain, because in this case it's a square, and I would just set this to 1080, okay? And now, the other thing is this quality tab. You can play around with this on your own, but 100% quality makes rather big loops, and I think you probably want to lower this down to somewhere halfway down, just to lower the quality, okay? So that's fine, I'm going to hit OK here, and now here, you just want to basically click on this and give it like a good name and put it in a good folder somewhere. Like here, for example, and I'll just call this Simple Animation GIF, and I'll hit Save, and then I can go ahead and press this green play-like button here. And it's rendering, you can see the little bar, and what we're waiting for is the rendered chime at the end, which is the happiest noise in the world, because that means that your work's done, right? So now what I'm going to do is click on this little link here that's given you. It'll open the file, and now here you go. It is now a tangible thing which we could post to Instagram or send to the Emmys so that they can give us an award, right? And that's it, really. These are the steps that I always take every time I animate anything in After Effects, and pretty much anytime anybody animates anything in After Effects, including you, I hope, from now on, right? Let's actually review these steps just to go over them again, because they're important, right? So first of all, generally what you're starting out with is by importing art into After Effects. Now, sometimes you're making art in After Effects, but oftentimes, really, it's a combination of things. For me, I'm importing Photoshop art, I'm importing Illustrator art, I might be working with an audio track that I pull in, or a cut from Premiere, and then I might be creating art also in After Effects at the same time, right? So, yeah. But importing is a really big step, generally the first one, right? Second, you're really working on the animation, and you're just really animating each layer until it feels right, which is obviously the bulk of the work and where a lot of the finesse comes in, okay? But once you're done with that, then you move on to the rendering stage, which we just showed you, and basically, you know, we didn't really talk about this, but you can work in a lot of different formats and sizes and things in After Effects, and you just want to make sure when you render, that you're rendering the correct way for what you worked on. And also, a lot of times, especially nowadays, clients will need you to render one way and another way because they might be using the final product for different formats or whatever. So rendering is a really important step too, something you might actually have to do more than once on any project, right? And the final step that's really important is that once everything's all done, you get to drink martinis on a yacht while counting your money. And that's the basic workflow of any animation project. Yes, this is the exciting, exciting life of a motion design.